Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about this communication skill set called nonviolent communication, also known as NVC. I know a lot of you have heard of it because you've been with us before, but if you haven't, we'd like to hear what you do know about it. And so feel free to put it in the chat if you say, nope, this is brand new to me, or I know a little bit. We always, it's just kind of nice to be able to gauge what people know about it. So tonight we're going to be talking about how nonviolent communication can open the door to this potential to have a family life of more ease and harmony. Because practicing nonviolent communication is really a form of unlearning behaviors that perhaps us as adults hasn't served our well-being very well. So here, I just letting everybody know, a lot of the material in this presentation is based on the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And underneath the little thumbnail of the book, that's the website we always send people to if you want to buy the book for yourself. It's a really interesting read. You know, it's awesome to just really get into the depths of it. So if you want to get your copy, we like to send people there. The folks at Pedal Dance are good friends of ours. So nonviolent communication is one of the main components of our work too, along with introducing the trauma responsive approach, especially into schools, but also organizations, and then obviously even for the family. And we actually cover all those aspects in our other webinars, which we hold monthly, usually every couple of weeks. We'll tell you a little bit more about that toward the end. And so I'm going to pause for a second and let our director tell you just a little bit about what we do.
Hello, everyone. I'm the director of the Relationship Foundation. I'm Michael Jazz. And over the last 10 years, we've developed a curriculum. It's called Healthy Relationships 101. We developed it with ongoing collaboration with city teachers and social workers and counselors here in New York City. The curriculum contains all of what will be shared tonight and more. And we also work in person with schools and organizations through our Healthy Relationships training. After the schools closed in March, we continued presenting our school trainings to the schools in the city at no charge, since the school budgets were completely cut. Now, we started this free webinar series as a way to continue our education work, and we appreciate all of you who have donated to support our webinar series to the public. All the donations that are made are tax deductible. We're a certified public nonprofit. And you can find the link to donate on our website, or you could join us on Patreon and get all sorts of fun benefits. Cicely has set this up, and we are now on Patreon for those who are interested in supporting our work, getting monthly freebies, discounts on our workshops. We have some cohorts coming up in February and March. Cicely will tell you more about that at the end of the evening. And you can also get access to our webinars without having to register once you go on Patreon. And you'll see the Patreon link on the screen in just a moment. And again, thank you to everyone who has already donated. Now, at the end of the presentation, we are going to open everything up to discussion and comments, questions and answers. So be prepared. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. We'll try to answer it before the end of the evening and the Q&A. But if we can't, we'll do it when Cicely completes the evening presentation. And do be patient, I guess. We had a couple people somehow when we start the Q&A, a couple times people did get cut off, but we'll bring you right back in. Okay, so in these upcoming webinars that I mentioned, there are 2 cohort trainings scheduled for February and March, and these will further explore the principles that will be presented this evening, as well as the neuroscience of empathy and trauma and how to bring healing to those who have experienced trauma. And we just did a workshop, a webinar earlier this week on the neuroscience of trauma. Between Christmas and New Year's, we did the neuroscience of empathic listening. And we're going to have another sort of part 2 of the empathic listening neuroscience of that. And that's going to be on the 19th of January. You can also request to join our private Facebook group where you can find other like-minded people to connect with, and the name of the group is also listed in the chat. So contact us for more information. We'll be supplying a survey right now in case you have to leave early, and at the end for you to give us your feedback as well as request more information. And thanks again.
All right, thanks, Michael. All right, so we're going to talk just for a second about that neuroscience, like Michael mentioned, of a child's brain architecture, because this is really important. I know when I learned about this, I was surprised at the level of understanding it gave me of the way my kids' brains work. So here's one thing to think of. In our normal everyday existence, we're in what's called the beta brainwave state with a B. That fluctuates depending on our peace of mind or our stress levels. And there's even levels within beta. We can be in high beta or low beta. Now, when we fall asleep and we dream, we actually drop into alpha waves, then theta waves, and then into the deep sleep of the delta brainwave. I know a lot of this, I probably learned it in school, but I didn't remember any of this. Now, our prefrontal cortex, that's what governs impulse control and concentration and decision making. And it's interesting to know that this doesn't even begin to come online until a child is about 6 years old, sometimes even a little later. So for parents, think of these, these little babies or young children as really the fact that they are in the delta state actually for the first few years of their life. It's almost as if they are asleep with their eyes open. And so with this realization, we also realize that they're extremely sensitive to their inborn survival instincts and their need for love and nurturing and touch, lots of eye contact. And then obviously the things like food and physical comfort and safety. And thus, a parent's really highest responsibility is to create that safe and stable environment so that a child can flourish and thrive and then grow into the adult that you probably envision, in their future. So how do we create that environment? So now we're going to talk a little bit about this term, nonviolent communication. So the word nonviolence, we don't think of ourselves as violent people. We associate that with wars and beatings and killings. But what about the words that create conflict? You say, what's wrong with you? That was stupid. We know we shouldn't say things like that, especially to our children, but sometimes in the moment it slips out and we speak aggressively to our children sometimes or to other people in general. And then unfortunately, as we all know, aggressive words can lead to aggressive actions. But nonviolent communication offers life skills that can create greater connection in anyone's life with anyone. And we're going to illustrate this tonight. And since our family is our first source of education about ourselves, about relating, and about the world, that's why this is so important. So, the world of conflict. Those of you who've been here with us before have probably seen this one, but this is so important. This is why we show it on most of our presentations. This is the world that we're used to. We're conditioned to judge people and things around us from a very early age. Really, it becomes something we're not even conscious of that we're doing. Really, and it's interesting because judging really, it sort of hijacks our brain into a false sense of safety and stability. But so we might think we're improving things by judging what's going on around us, but really it makes us more anxious, makes us more stressed, and really it distracts us from being able to authentically express the things that we value most. So nonviolent communication in the family is an important topic because our families shape us, and they're usually our first experience of love and acceptance. But sadly, for some people, some children, rejection and trauma, rejection. So here are two lists. You've probably found yourself in the midst of conversations with the reactions you see on the left side, probably more than you would care to admit. I know it's true of me. And you'd love to have more experiences filled with the things that you see on the right side. Respect, listening, attentiveness, care, all those things you'd like to have with your kids, your partner, your teenagers, your in-laws. So these are things that we'd like to change. So why it matters. The fundamentals of nonviolent communication include learning to express our needs and feelings without blame and judgment, and to listen empathically. Now, children, especially when they're young, they tend to be open-minded and non-judgmental. And it's during childhood that we need to be teaching children how to express their needs and feelings by providing this comprehensive vocabulary for them. That's what we're going to be covering a little later. I know in a recent workshop that the Relationship Foundation held, there was a man, what he said really struck me. He had been incarcerated in his younger years. And he said that if only he had been given the vocabulary to express his emotions with something more than just the generic, bad or even mad, he said he wonders if he could have avoided so much heartache in his life. He said he never felt free or even knew that he could express the fact that something wasn't bad so much as he was maybe afraid or discouraged or anxious or worried or scared. A guy, he was expected to be a tough kid, tough teenager, so he didn't even have that kind of vocabulary given to him as a child. Now he looks back and wonders what his life might have looked like if he had had access to a more helpful vocabulary in his youth. And that just really struck me. So when NVC really provides a framework to build a new way of relating. I know when I started learning about nonviolent communication, I found that I was immediately imagining a triangle in my mind. And I wonder why that's what popped into my head first. So I looked up the triangle, I Googled it. It said it's considered the strongest shape because it has a strong base, it's capable of holding its shape, and it can provide immense support. And any framework that teaches children and parents to be empowered individuals and to increase our emotional intelligence with the goal of creating mutually satisfying relationships, that's obviously worthwhile. And so nonviolent communication is such a framework. And that's why we recommend NVC for parents and families. Because often the work, it has to begin inside with yourself. So as a parent, you're in charge of teaching this small person how to function effectively in life. We all know what great parents we were before we had kids, right? We can look back and realize some of the silly things we said to other parents. But just imagine the possibilities if you have this unique set of skills to teach your children, and then to be able to do that by modeling it yourself. So NVC helps you become a little more conscious of your motivations and your intentions, which is going to help you be less likely to alienate your children. Then as you learn to be more authentic and compassionate, you can build those bonds of trust that'll last a lifetime. And then beyond the roles of parent and child, we realize we're all just human beings yearning to love, to be seen, and to contribute. So when you connect with your child and treat them as a human being, you're also gaining that level of trust. Sometimes as parents, it's easy to focus on just getting our children to do what we want. Sometimes they just have to do what we want, but it's easy to let that be the focus at the cost of the long-term relationship. So nonviolent parenting is also called respectful parenting, precisely because it's that, a way to parent that prioritizes long-term relationships of care and mutual care as the child gets older, and trust and consideration and respect, obviously. So when we can let go of our old habits and old stories that we might not even realize are running through our head and relate from one human to another, even if they're a little human, you can teach yourself how to express yourself authentically and from the heart, and to listen compassionately. And you can start using nonviolent communication skills to improve all your family relationships. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of what this nonviolent communication is. So these are the essential elements of NVC, and it's often sort of abbreviated OFNR: observations, feelings, needs, and requests. Now we're going to look at observations and requests very briefly, and then we're going to focus on the needs and feelings for the rest of the presentation. So observations should be specific to an incident or behavior. It shouldn't be a generalization. We've all done it. You're always late, but all a comment like that does is just make the person defensive who you're saying it to. Most of us know that it's a counterproductive approach, but we say these things out of habit, usually because they were said to us, or we hear people saying it. And also another thing is to be aware of the tendency to make evaluations of the person instead of just a simple observation. Now, what's that? What's an evaluation versus an observation? So here's a couple of examples. An evaluation, you're saying you procrastinate too much, or you always procrastinate. You're such a procrastinator. But that, again, just puts a person on the defensive when really what would be more useful is making just an observation without the evaluation. Same as something like, I've noticed that you wait until the night before to study for your exams. That's factual and it's specific, but you're not making a generalization. And you're not evaluating the person and their behavior. Same thing with the bottom one. You never take out the trash when I ask you to. Okay, maybe they rarely do it, but probably once they have done it. And all that does is just put them on the offense. But if you say, twice this week I asked you to take out the trash and you didn't, that's a pure observation. And then the person's more likely to, be able to continue a conversation about it as opposed to it turning into an argument. So then we have just sort of a comparison of the difference between a request and a demand. Usually our evaluations or observations are usually followed by us telling the person something that we want them to do, or to do differently, or stop doing. Now, learning how to frame our words as requests really goes a long way with children, especially teenagers and what we call three-nagers. I have a three-nager. It's not fun always. But even as adults, have you ever experienced the person demanding of you something of you and their manner just irritates you so much that it just makes you want to dig in your heels and refuse to comply? I think we've all had that happen. So just imagine being a child where so much of the world is out of your control simply because of your age and your size, but then having the adults in your life just demanding things of you when they could frame it as a request so often. So here we see some of the fundamentals. Be specific, use positive language, and ask, would you be willing to? Now, using positive language means that instead of saying, don't leave the dirty dishes on the table, you'd say, would you be willing to put your dish in the sink? Not using the word don't makes you be using more positive language. It is funny how the negative word seems to be what kids catch, the don't. So they, okay, I won't, even though that's exactly the opposite of what you actually said. I know I've tried this with my own children, and I've found so much more success in getting my needs met, especially my needs for things like order and consideration and support. So instead of saying, clean your room, I now ask, would you mind picking up the Legos off the floor for me? It was a specific request instead of a vague demand. And go figure, they usually do it, and we're all happier when it finally gets done. And this is actually a method that works with kids who might have like issues with attention, kids who might have ADHD, kids who are not the neurotypical. Speaking of, there's one of mine. And excuse me for just a second. Sorry about that. Anyway, so yeah, I think where I was saying about like kids with ADHD, a lot of times very vague requests they get overwhelmed by. So having very specific, concrete, achievable things, they thrive with that kind of instruction. So that was just a side point I was going to make. And so it's also helpful to look inside yourself when you're making a request. If in your own mind you're still thinking that you have a right to have your child or your partner do this, or that you deserve it, or that they should, it's really still a demand, even if you're saying it nicely. So a request is still a demand if it has criticism or judgment behind it. So that's just kind of an interesting thing to start thinking about as you find yourself speaking to your kids or your family. Okay, and so the request versus the demands. So requests as opposed to demands, they need to be doable, they need to be specific, and we should be willing to hear an answer of no as an attempt to meet a need. I know at first I was like, well, there's times I tell my kids things, they don't have the option of saying no, but we all know kids say no, and that's okay. They're saying no to meet a need for independence or some other thing that we don't even understand totally, but at least it changes our viewpoint of these kind of encounters with our kids. Okay, so now we're going to move on to this needs and feelings portion of this OFNR principle. Okay, so needs and feelings. You'll see here it says feelings are what we experience when our needs are either met or not met. And needs are really everything we have ever done and everything we will ever do is to meet a need. So we can see this, how these two things, they're separate, but they're very related. And what's interesting about the word need and feel, we tend to use those words in our everyday language very loosely. I feel like pizza. I feel like taking a walk. I feel like going to a movie, you know, or you say, I need a new computer. I need a girlfriend. I need a better job. But now when we go on to this next list, you're going to look at this and see, do you see any of those things on this list? Do you see pizza or a movie or a girlfriend on this list? No. Now, this list was sent out to everybody in the last 2 reminder emails, but if you didn't get it, we're going to put it in the chat. It's a nice little PDF download you can have. You can print it out. It's nice to have and keep around as you're trying to practice this new vocabulary. It's handy to have. So there we go. I just saw it go in the chat, so feel free to grab it if you didn't get it in the email. So now look at this list and think, what needs are essential for children? Well, we can see things like affection, care, love, play, learning, safety. And then think outside of just your children. Think about you and your partner. What do couples need? Appreciation, companionship, empathy. That's one we've been talking about. Love, intimacy. Those are pretty obvious. Harmony, but those are very concrete needs. Now, make a list, you know, if you have a piece of paper, do it on paper or just in your head. What are some needs that you would like to have met with your family members, your partner, your children, your parents, or your in-laws? Now, when you're looking at this list, here's a question. It's kind of fun exercise, especially for those who haven't been here before. What do you call someone who doesn't have any needs? So think about that. And if you have an answer or an idea, put it in the chat. What do you call someone who doesn't have any needs? Content, dead. Exactly. All of these needs are about life. When you look at the physical well-being, things like air, food, water, rest. You know, if we don't have air and food and water, we're going to be dead. So needs are not only just things that we value, but they're about life. So now here's another list. An important thing to note is that while when we look at this list, we might generally want to call this a list of good feelings. We don't call it that. We call it feelings associated with met needs, because what's good to one person isn't necessarily good to someone else. Maybe some people like being stimulated and maybe others don't. Maybe they prefer to be more relaxed. So that's why we don't want to necessarily call it good or bad. We'll get to the bad one in a minute. But one thing that's important to notice is how specific they are. They aren't general or vague. And you can have several at once. Like you can have a feeling of curiosity and pleasure and fulfillment and encouragement. You can have all these things at once. So now the next list is of the feelings associated with unmet needs. Interesting to notice, it's a little longer of a list, but again, not bad feelings. You know, most of them we would consider more on the negative side, but not necessarily all. So when you look at this list, you can see that, again, they're specific. Several can be true at once. Like you can be restless and disappointed and aggravated. All those things can happen at once. And then also what's interesting is you can experience feelings from both of these lists at once. Like me right now, this is my first time doing a full webinar like this. So maybe I'm a little worried, I'm maybe a little anxious, a little nervous, but I'm also feeling inspired and enthusiastic and motivated and grateful that all these people showed up tonight. So getting comfortable with using these words is important. And teaching our children how to use these words is essential. It's a practice. What you do when you want to get good at a sport or a musical instrument or learning a new language, you practice. It doesn't happen with one exposure. It requires repeated exposures. Learning these words and nonviolent communication is a practice. That's why we hold our webinars every single month, because people enjoy coming back and hearing it again and getting new things in their brain. So nonviolent communication gives us clear and effective tools for how to handle difficult conversations with family members. Now, one thing, of course, is very clear. Most of us know this. Often our closest relationships can be the most intense. So what quality do we often need in order to have more understanding and keep peace at home? That's empathy. So one of the capacities that nonviolent communication helps you develop is empathy. You'll find that empathy often serves you in getting through difficult conversations with family members. Using empathy, you'll help your family members feel heard and understood. Because an important thing to remember is that empathy does not equal agreement. You don't have to agree with the person to show them empathy. You're just letting them experience the fact that you get it. Whatever is happening to them, you get it. This goes a long way toward diffusing potential conflicts. When we listen empathically, the emotional charge of a difficult conversation is lowered. We can become closer emotionally. We cultivate care and trust. We increase the chance of more honesty in the future. And we're able to navigate a challenging topic in a way that's more likely to lead to a solution that's mutually agreeable to all parties involved. Usually that's what we all want. So now we're going to speak for just a second about empathy blockers. Here's an interesting one for a little self-examination, because look at this list and think of the last time someone expressed the frustration to you. Did you show them true empathy? Maybe. Odds are you may have done one of these things instead, or turn the situation around. You were expressing a frustration to someone and they did one of these things, like one-upping. They say, well, you thought you had a bad morning, and then they tell you their story. That can kind of combine with the storytelling one. Advising and fixing, they immediately just launch into all these suggestions of how you can, solve the problem that you expressed. Educating, they send you the title of a book or they argue with you. And all of these tend to come under the umbrella sort of judging. They think they know better than you do. And it's such a turnoff. We all know the reaction that we have when people do those things. That's why we find ourselves rolling our eyes in the middle of conversations so often. Now, with the family, and especially extended family, we'll often encounter advising, especially unwanted advice, storytelling, one-upping, the discounting, judging. So for a minute here, we're going to step away from the subject of children for a moment. We're going to do a really fascinating exploration of understanding the needs and feelings with other adults in our family. And for those of you who've done this one with us before, you know this one, but I always encourage everyone to do it. Because you can think of sometimes a different story or just a different application, especially now that we're talking in the family. So try to think of something maybe specific to your family. So if everybody has a piece of paper, get a piece of paper and make this T shape like you see here. So now think of a time when someone said or did something that really bugged you. Not anything horrible, just something ordinary but annoying or made you a little angry. And then write it in that blank space above the T. Now, I'm going to tell you what my example is that really made NVC and family relations start making sense to me. Okay, so this is a picture of my firstborn. I was 30 years old when I had him. We live in Arizona. He was born in the summer, so it was really hot the first few months of his life. He often went around looking like this. Half the time he didn't have a shirt on. I never put shoes on him. He couldn't even walk yet. I'm kind of a minimalist, kind of a hippie at heart. So this is how my baby was dressed a lot of the time. Now, I'm going to preface the rest of the story with saying I love my mother-in-law. We get along very well. But nearly every time she would see my son, which was several times a week, she would tickle his toes and very sweetly say, "Where are your shoes, little boy?" Or I would leave him with her for the day and I would come back and find him in different clothes with shoes on and sometimes a hat so she could take pictures of him. Now, I interpreted all of that as saying, "Cicely, you're being negligent." She never said that, but that was how I interpreted it. And the repeated comments and actions and the associated judgments, it just grated on my sleep-deprived new mom nerves. So let's go back to this T exercise. So think of that time that someone said or did something to you that really bugged you. So then write it at the top. And then underneath on the left side, write the word feelings. Or just an F is fine. And then let's go back to that unmet needs list, the feelings. So now take a look at this slide and think about what feelings you had in relation to the situation that you picked. I know for mine, it elicited feelings of frustration, anxiety, shame. It made me feel fragile. I was troubled, made me insecure, made me very unhappy. So write your feelings under that section on your piece of paper. I'll give you about 30 seconds just so you can really take a good look at the list. And you'll probably notice there is a lot of emotions that you might have to write down. You might have a short list, you might have a long list. Your feelings that came out of whatever this situation was. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a chance. And again, if you have the download, you can keep looking at it or keep adding other things that come to your mind as we're kind of going on. So now we're going to go back and look at this at our key again. And on the right side, you're going to write the word needs, or just the letter N is fine. So now we're going to go back and look at this needs list, the one that we looked at earlier. Now, what needs did you have that were not being met when this incident or comment happened? Well, for me, in my situation, it was a need for acceptance, respect, support, trust, competence, dignity. So take about 30 seconds and write down those needs that you had that weren't being met. So this is a really interesting way to explore our own needs and feelings in any given situation. But this really is the easy part of the exercise. We know what we were feeling, even if we hadn't put a name on it. We know what we needed, even if we hadn't put a name on it. But here's the challenging part. So let me show you a couple more pictures. So these are pictures of my son, either after I left him with my mother-in-law for the day, or wearing an outfit that she specifically bought for him. So I felt obligated to put him in it, even though it wasn't my style. Often, every inch of his body covered in clothing. Sometimes he had a hat, always had shoes on, even though he couldn't walk yet. In her mind, this is what a cared for child looked like. So now, again, let's go back to this T exercise and then write another line underneath and write the word feelings again on the left side under the line. So this one can be challenging because what we're going to do this time is take a guess at the feelings of the other person in your situation that you thought of. So like in my case, my mother-in-law, what were her feelings, her likely feelings in this situation? I had never given any thought to how was she probably feeling? Even if I didn't like what she was doing or saying, how was she feeling that made her do or say those things? So now let's go back to this list of the unmet needs. So what were the likely feelings of the person who you were irritated at? Like in this case, I can just guess that maybe my mother-in-law was feeling worried about her first grandson. It made her anxious to see him without shoes on. It made her unsettled, feel insecure. Maybe she was a little disappointed in me. So take a few seconds to do this for your incident that you have in your mind. So what feelings was the other person in your situation feeling, do you think, at this time? Okay, so now we're going to go back to that T exercise. And then again, just like before, you're going to write the word needs on the lower right side. And again, we're going to look at what needs was your other person trying to meet by the things they said or did. So like, what was my mother-in-law trying? What needs did she have? So then we're going to go back to this needs list again, take a look at it again. So how about your person? I'm guessing my mother-in-law probably had a need for safety. She was worried he was cold. She was worried his feet were going to get hurt when he started walking. Care, nurturing. Maybe she considered it more beautiful to have him all dressed up. Peace of mind, competence. She felt it was more dignified to have him fully dressed. So take 30 seconds to, again, do this for your incident. or situation. Okay, so now as you're finishing that up, take a look at your paper and think about this exercise. Do you have even just a little more understanding for that other person? Even if you still don't agree or appreciate with what they did or said, do you understand it a little more? Or maybe even have a little bit of empathy for them, for where they were coming from? And so here's something, notice this on my paper. This is interesting. This happens a lot of times. So see if you had a similar experience. Notice how many of the feelings and needs, I tried to bold most of them, that her feelings and my feelings were actually very similar, as well as on the needs side. We both had a few needs that actually matched up. So it's interesting how often this can happen actually as you go through different maybe scenarios in your mind. And even if you didn't have this exact thing, again, you might have had kind of a aha, moment, a little bit more understanding and empathy again, like we said. That's really the critical thing, is that empathy and understanding. So to wrap up, we're going to go on to this idea of strategies. Like we mentioned before, needs, everything we've ever done, everything we ever will do, and everything we're doing now is to meet a need. So we might not always appreciate the strategies of others, but when we realize that everything we've done is to meet a need, we can maybe go through life with a little bit more understanding and empathy, and especially for our children who are still learning how to live life. So this world of greater possibilities, when we remove judgment, like we saw in that first slide, that slide that we call the world of conflict, when we remove the judgment out of the equation and start looking for the needs and feelings of others, and then understand our own strategies and their strategies, we can leave that world of judgment and then hopefully enter this world of a little more possibility, a little more peace. So thank you everybody for coming. I hope you all enjoyed. And before we open up the discussion, don't forget we do have the survey. So if anybody has to leave, please fill out the survey if you haven't done so before in the past. And we will also hit the highlights just real quick of our webinars that are coming up. Like Michael was saying earlier, our part 2 of our neuroscience of empathy is on January 19th. That one was immensely popular, and a lot of people asked for a little more time in the empathy practice that we had there. A lot of them were hoping for a little more time, so we're hoping to do that in that presentation. Then we're going to be doing another basic introduction to NVC on the 26th. And then we have one that we're going to do on the neuroscience of love. We think we might do it on February 9th, but we might be adjusting the day of that a little bit. So just keep an eye on our Eventbrite page, or if you're on our newsletters, you'll see it there when we announce that one. And then, and also don't forget, we mentioned our Patreon. We have it now where if you sign up to become our Patreon, you don't have to register for each webinar individually. It's been so nice to see how many people we've had coming in repeatedly for repeated webinars. That's a great way to be able to skip the registration process. We'll always be posting the information about the webinars up front on the Patreon, and you're helping us out too. So we definitely appreciate that. And so on our next slide, we're talking a little bit about those 2 groups we are holding in February and March for more in-depth learning about the neuroscience, NVC, and the trauma side of our work, about learning and understanding the adverse childhood experiences. So this is 2 days each, one group in February, 2 days, one group in March, 2 days. So anyone's welcome to sign up for that. We do right now, we still have a discount code for the tickets for that one. If you use the code SAVE15 with the number 15, you can save $15 on a ticket. So hopefully we get it. Some of you might be interested in joining us for that. And then on the right, you can see a little bit about our group workshops. We do it for schools and organizations. We also have a curriculum that teachers, school social workers, counselors have used with a good deal of success with their students. We also can offer these workshops in Spanish. We have a member of our staff who speaks Spanish who can offer these workshops that way. And so all this is things you can hopefully be able to use from us in your school or your organization. And we do have a sliding fee scale. If you're a nonprofit or a real small organization, we want to work with anybody to make it happen for anybody. Getting this information out there is what really matters to us. So you should be able to see my email there at the bottom. You can email me directly, or on the next page, you'll see our general contact information again. You can email either of those. If you just have questions, or if you say, hey, I want to talk about how we can do this, just let us know. And you can also just ask in the survey as well to let us know, hey, I want some more information.